Thank you all for joining us today for the Swivl Adaptability Initiative webinar series. Today kicks off the last week of the series. We are so excited. It has been a great ride so far. We have been rocking and rolling since September, and here we are, the last week of the series. I am Concethia Campbell, Marketing Manager at Swivl, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today's session, Ken Shelton. Ken is a highly distinguished professional in education with a master's degree in education with the focus on educational technology and new media design and production. His academic background spans over 2 decades of hands-on teaching experience, with a significant part of his career devoted to shaping young minds at the middle school level through the lens of technology. Ken is an esteemed Apple Distinguished Educator, a Google Certified Innovator, and a Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert. He is also a notable figure in the California State Superintendent of Public Instruction's Education Technology Task Force. A committed advocate for equal learning opportunities, he regularly imparts knowledge and insights through keynote speeches, personalized consulting, organizational change, school and district transformation, and hands-on workshops. His range of expertise covers an array of topics, included but not limited to organizational leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion, inclusive learning environments, anti-bias and anti-racism, multimedia literacy, design, and career and technical education. Ken's dedication to enhancing digital learning opportunities for students led him to be acknowledged as an influencer to follow by EdTech Magazine. His influence transcends borders, having presented at numerous global conferences, schools, and education-related gatherings. We are so excited to have Ken here today. Ken, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Welcome to you all. Put in the chat that during the session, we will use the chat as our interactive, collaborative discussion space because this is meant to be interactive throughout most of the time. So I'm going to share the screen real quick, and then we can get rolling. Okay, and away we go. So couple of things that I want to share with you all preliminary. If you could just drop in the chat, yes or a no, that you are at least familiar with artificial intelligence and especially large language models, and you have, yes or no, you have played with them at least a little bit. Okay, totally familiar and use it. Yes, yes, yes. Rachel, that's definitive. You didn't, and Jenny, y'all didn't just give me one yes. You're like, yes, yes, yes. Perfect. And Jill Allen's yes, and somewhat. Okay, good. And have you all, love it, use it all the time. Good. Have you all played around with image generators as well? Okay, good. Okay, actually not as much. And Jenny, no. Okay, good. Well, so the whole idea around our time together is to really look at both of those. I won't go into all of the I won't go into all of the details necessarily, but the whole idea around this session is to really equip you all with an understanding of both of those two different platforms. They're both artificial intelligence. They're also all generative, but I'll go through all of that. So those of you that are not familiar with the image generators, you're going to familiarize yourself with some of the elements to it right now. And so the whole idea around this webinar series has been primarily focusing on 2 areas, which has been AI's impact on education and practical strategy. This session will look at both. The whole idea is to really look at what is the impact that it can have and is going to have on education, and then what are some of the practical strategies that we can begin the process of developing for ourselves as educators and incorporate within the context of our learning environments and within the actions of our pedagogical practice. So that's the whole idea around this whole idea of the title of how are we elevating education with AI and using it in ways that empower educators in, as I titled, language evolution and then also visual storytelling. So I'll share with you all a couple of things on this. First of all, I would say a history of public education has been a history of education reform. Everyone's always talking about reform, reform, reform. Yet, if you really do a historical analysis, very little changes. And so the whole idea for us is to really start to push the narrative around rethinking not just education as a whole, but what we teach, how we teach, the methodologies that we use, and the impact that we would like for education to have. I do think, I've been around for a while, and I have a slide to touch on it a little bit, but I think that technology tends to be one of the definitive catalysts for change, even though that change is slower than it needs to be. And one of the prompts that I always pose to educational leaders, whether they be site administrators, school leaders, or district leaders, is, how has your practice within your school or your district evolved to better meet the needs of the kids that you serve? Or are you still teaching the same now as the learning occurring still the same now as it was 20 years ago? And so that leads me to a question I want to ask you all. So I'm going to give you all two different scenarios. And this is a setup for some of what's going to happen later. So this is not a trick question by any stretch. So I'm going to pose two different scenarios. I'll read through them. I want you all to take a moment to process, and then I'm going to ask you, of the two scenarios, which one would you select? Okay, so here we go. Scenario one: you are looking for support on how to get from one point to another. You would like for me to show you one route and only tell you about the cool and amazing things you will see. Okay, that's scenario one. Scenario two: you are looking for support on how to get from one point to another. You would like for me to show you all of the possible options so that you can choose. You also want me to show you routes that have barriers, dangers, and lead to dead ends, but then also tell you about this cool stuff that you may see. Of those two scenarios, just drop it in the chat. Which one of those two would you select? And there's 12 of you, so I'm going to say there has to be 12 answers, no abstentions. Right now, the twos have it. Now it's even, still even. Somebody break the tie, even though there's an even number of us. So I think that was everybody, because we're not that many. I'm going to break the tie, and I'm going to say two, but I'm biased. You'll hear about that too. So the reason why I pose this scenario is, unfortunately, what tends to happen frequently when it comes to the conversation about artificial intelligence is scenario one. What needs to be happening is scenario two. The whole idea being, you're still going to get to the destination that you want. But again, if I'm only telling you one thing and showing you only one way and only telling you the good things, then my question is always, what are you hiding, or what gaps exist in your knowledge set that you're not equipping me with the full information so that I can make the best choice possible, knowing that I will still get from one point to another. And so that's why I shared this, because you're going to see why scenario two is what I would say, if I'm going to put it this way, as an educator, scenario two for me in this perspective is the moral, ethical, and responsible approach to artificial intelligence. And so the goals for us in this session are the following: is to focus on the importance of, one, digital literacy, the importance of digital fluency, and on the next slide, I define these terms. Understand the impact of bias. I will touch more heavily on that as we work our way through, and you'll see examples. Development of acute language skills and cultivation of a technology acumen. So this is how I define those terms in our context. And I'll pause for a moment so that you all can read. Actually, I'll read along and you all can read along with me. So the whole idea around literacy in this context is the ability to use information technology and digital media to find, evaluate, create, and share information effectively, responsibly, and safely. That's the literacy part. The fluency part, the ability to choose and use technology comfortably, effectively, and intuitively. That's why I asked you all early on, how many of you are familiar with, how many of you have used artificial intelligence, and then how many of you have used large language models or image generators? Bias in this context, the potential for automated systems like machine learning models or algorithms to produce skewed, prejudiced, or unfair results due to problematic data or design. And I'll bring it up later. When it comes to artificial intelligence, it's problematic data and design. And then for our acumen, it's one's depth of understanding and ability to appropriately leverage technology to achieve our educational goals. So this is how I define these things. And these are all the things that we're going to cover in the time that we have. I will stress to you all, give yourself time, space, and grace to process a lot of what I cover, because it's a lot that we're only together for about an hour. A lot of what I cover theoretically could easily be, I would say a workshop series of 10 hours or more. But I at least wanted you all to start off with the foundational understanding, and especially if you have familiarity with the platforms, to start to develop to open the aperture and develop a broader perspective on what it is, how it works, how we can leverage it, what are the dangers, and what are the ways we can mitigate the effects of the dangers, i.e., scenario 2, not scenario 1. So to refresh a little bit here, again, foundational setting at the moment. AI in this context it means artificial intelligence is a way to make computers act and think like humans. If you think about us, we tend to, the way our brains work, we tend to identify patterns, and we tend to engage in any of our social interactions and our activities in general from a repetitious perspective. We tend to be repetitive patterns. And you'll see that in a moment. It's like giving a computer a brain so that it can learn and make decisions on its own. Okay. The Collins Dictionary defines it as a type of computer technology concerned with making machines work in an intelligent way, similar to the way the human mind works. So, going back to the bias, among other things, who is defining intelligent and based on what perspective? So if you think about the platforms that you all have used, that you're most familiar with, and that are consistently and constantly being propagated, especially over the last 12 months, who are the people that are designing these platforms? What are the data sets that they're using? Who is writing the algorithms? How are they defining intelligence? And based on what perspective? That leads to the next thing, and that is, it's supposed to work in an artificial intelligence work. It's supposed to, again, mimic the cognitive process and decision-making abilities of the human brain, using advanced algorithms and techniques such as machine learning and deep learning, which I'll touch on those later, to analyze data, identify patterns, and make predictions. So the whole idea being, if I were to, I'm going to ask you all a question, and I'm going to ask you to just put the response in the chat. I'm going to start off a story by saying, once upon a, and now fill in that blank. Once upon a, and fill in the blank. And Concethia and Paul, obviously, you got it. Alex, I love it. Jenny, thank you. Yes. So the whole idea around that is a pattern, and it is predictive. You all know that in your lived experience and context, when someone said once upon a, more often than not, the follow-up word in that order of words is going to be time. Yes, there are deviations, but for the most part, it's time. That is an identification of a pattern. You all engaged in deep learning and you analyze data. The data you analyze is your lived experience up to this point, of which every time you've heard the beginning of a story as once upon a, more often than not, it's been time. So therefore, you predicted it. That is exactly how AI works. It takes all that data and looks at patterns and pattern recognition and repetition of patterns, and that's where it becomes predictive. The question to always ask is, how many patterns exist in our social narratives, our social interactions, and in our case, our educational institutions that are predictive, but they're also harmful? Knowing that is amongst some of the data sets that is in the artificial intelligence platforms that we use. And I'll go through the whole data thing before. And so that's why it's important to recognize, I always say, if it's predictable, it's also preventable. And that's going to get into what we'll do later around some of our language acquisition. But again, it's what are the things that are patterns that are normalized that can lead us down an unwanted or a potentially destructive path within education. And so let me back up a little bit and share with you all a few things. So one, as you all shared, you use it, AI is here, and just like all the following things, it will continue to impact our lives and our professions. And so as you look at these icons here, think about how it impacted your life and in some cases impacted your profession. And my favorite ones to call out based on my lived experience, one is on the left, is a calculator because, yes, I was a student in school in math class where I would ask the teacher if I could, my math teachers, if I could use a calculator. And I will share with you all, 100% of the time I was told no. And then, of course, I'd follow with like, well, why can't I? It's a resource and it's available for me. Why can't I use it? And the teacher's response to me was, because what? When you get older, are you going to have a calculator with you at all times? And of course, I'm holding up my phone because the answer is actually yes. And I share that in the context of that. Also, if you think about all of these things, how cell phones have transformed, the internet, computers, how we travel, all of those things, the ways we communicate, all of those things have impacted both our lives and our professions. And I share that because ultimately the question I want to ask you all to start is, do you believe that AI is overhyped? And feel free to drop in the chat yes or no if you think it's overhyped. Rachel, all good. Take care of the littles, but thank you for being here. No worries. Okay, so I got a whole lot of no's. You don't think it's overhyped. Good. Because the whole idea around this is to recognize that in education, every time something new pops up, there's always this like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I always tell people, you can be excited, but you also need to take a pause, or to quote the late Coach Wooden, Coach John Wooden, be quick, but don't hurry. Be quick to learn about it, but don't hurry to jump on the bandwagon. I've been around ed tech for a while, and I'll share with you, I've seen a lot of things come and go. I've seen a whole lot of fervor over a platform. 18, 24 months later, it's gone. This one won't be gone. And let me even go back to this because I'm going to point out a couple of things to share with you all. I remember, and the current times reminds me, I remember all the fervor over Google search. And I remember having conversations with educators like, oh, we can't have the kids use Google search because they're going to Google the answers. And of course, for me, my whole thing was like, well, maybe we should ask different questions. And then also the whole idea around, well, you can't have to use Wikipedia. How can't have the kids use Wikipedia because they're just going to copy and paste the answers? And I'm like, you mean the same way I transcribed sections out of the Encyclopedia Britannica that I had? And so the whole idea being with these emerging technologies, some are going to come and go, some are here, and they're only going to impact our lives in more and more and more and more ways. And so I don't believe it's overhyped at all. But I do think that we need to be mindful of a lot of things that I've already touched on. So I want to share with you all a video real quick that reminds me of where we currently are.
But you know, I think about this, and what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What the hell is that exactly?
Well, it's become a place where people are publishing information.
Right.
So everybody can have their own homepage. Companies are there, the latest information. It's wild what's going on. You can send electronic mail to people. It is the big new thing.
Yeah, but you know, it's easy to criticize something you don't fully understand, which is my position here.
Go ahead.
But I can remember a couple of months ago, there was like a big breakthrough announcement that on the internet or on some computer deal, they were going to broadcast a baseball game. You could listen to a baseball game on your computer. And I just thought to myself, does radio ring a bell? You know what I mean?
There's a difference.
There is a difference.
It's not a huge difference.
What is the difference?
But you can listen to the baseball game whenever you want.
All right.
Too.
Oh, I see. So it's stored in one of your memory deals,
exactly.
And then you can come
That's
back
the
a year
RAM
later.
Thing you talked about earlier.
Yeah. Do tape recorders ring a bell? Yeah, I just don't know. What can you, just knowing me the little you know me now, what am I missing here? What do I need?
Well, if you want to learn about the latest cigars or auto racing statistics.
Well, you know, I've got that covered. I subscribe to 2 British magazines devoted entirely to motorsports, and I call the Quaker State Speed Line about 2 times a half hour. So now would the computer give me more than I'm getting that way?
Well, you can find other people who have the same unusual interests you do. And
you mean the troubled loner chat room on the internet?
Absolutely.
I think one day I'll get one of these deals, but I've played with them, and then you type it in, and then you get that thing, that little arrow. Is that the arrow you move?
Bet.
And then it's just it's like, oh, I get it. It's an.
So here's a question for you all in the chat. Did he ever actually answer his question about what is this internet thing? Exactly. He never answered the question. The question was, what is this internet thing? And I would ask you all, knowing what you know now, give some thought and feel free to drop in the chat. How would you answer that question? What is this internet thing? And there's no reason to write a whole thesis statement in there, but the whole idea of me sharing this video, there's actually three parts to this. Number one, he never really answered his question. And this is David Letterman interviewing Bill Gates, who supposedly is an expert when it comes to technology. Okay. To me, the most simplistic answer, what is this internet thing? It gives you the ability to have one computer talk to another. That's it. That's how I would have answered it. And then when he says things like, well, have you ever heard of radio? When it comes to, auto racing, I would have said, but here's where it's different than your radio. You can listen to and tune in to a race, no matter where it occurs, anywhere in the world, at any given point, at any time, in real time. You can't do that with your radio. Oh, it saves it on your little hard drive. Well, now there is an opportunity for you to save all of the valuable information you want, and you don't need any sort of physical device to do that. It's called cloud computing. Oh, you want to connect with other people that like cigars? Not only will you be able to connect with like-minded people who enjoy cigars, but you'll be able to watch videos of how the tobacco is processed and how they're rolled. Communicate and connect to vendors that don't exist within your geographical region, connect to others who have an affinity for cigars just like you, and have real-time conversations over video, and even collaborate together on a platform of which you can share reviews of those cigars. So the whole idea being, when he asked the question, what is this internet thing? And as simplistic a term as possible, it's a system of which one computer can talk to another computer via the internet, which is a conduit for that connection. But the reason why I share this video with you all is because the way AI tends to be described right now is exactly how Bill Gates answered that question. It's all the cool things it can do, but it's not what exactly it is. And that's why I wanted to share with you all those terms as we started and some of the terminology to begin with. And so there's some things to keep in mind when it comes to AI. It is already a part of our lives. I'll share with you all historical context. The early versions of what is artificial intelligence date all the way back to about the mid-1950s. And it exists in all of these things. And I'll explain a little bit around how data is set up and the type of data sets that are used that differentiate what you see here versus what you all have played with. But all of these things are components of AI. There's also some things to keep in mind. And again, remember, I'm taking scenario 2 with that map. These are some things to keep in mind. And yes, I am going to point out some of the elephants in the room. So let's start off with the first one, being using artificial intelligence, and more specifically generative artificial intelligence, poses some ethical issues. So these are questions that I always encourage educators to not only have dialogue within the context of their divisions, their departments, their teams, their schools, their district, but also with students. And here are your core ethical questions when it comes to artificial intelligence and really emerging technologies in general. First, if I'm using it, is it against the law? And further to that point, does it violate explicit school or district policy? And the whole reason around that first question, I bring it up all the time with school districts I work with. I brought it up with state departments of ed that I've worked with, and many others. Do not imply acceptable use or responsible use. You need to be explicit, because if you imply, then there's too much ambiguity. And you'll see later why ambiguity serves no useful purpose. And then the follow-up next question, what if everyone did this? And how would I feel if someone did this to me? And then the last one, which I love having this conversation with students, am I sacrificing potential long-term benefits for short-term gains? If I know that I can go into a ChatGPT or some other large language model and have it write my essay for me, am I sacrificing long-term benefits for short-term gain? Yeah, I might get the essay done now, but what opportunities am I losing out on because I have this short-term gain, the essay is done, but what's the long-term benefit? Or what's the long-term ramification? And I find that when I start posing questions like that to students, that's what gets them really starting to think about, okay, I need to use it, but I need to use it in a responsible capacity, because I don't want to use it now to become so reliant upon it that I now have sacrificed long-term benefits of learning things. And I'll go through some other things. I'm also going to put an eye on several other things that we need to always insert into our conversations around the use of artificial intelligence. And these are two. So My dear friend Matt Miller did the webinar. I believe it was back in September, and he designed a perfect graphic to interrogate the whole idea around these. For time's sake, I won't go into detail, but I really think people need to start rethinking how do you define cheating and how do you define plagiarism. I'm going to share with you all legally, you cannot plagiarize artificial intelligence. I've had this conversation. Sometimes it's delved into almost an argument with educators. And I've said, listen, I have friends that are copyright attorneys and intellectual property attorneys. The legal definition of plagiarism is taking the work of another human being and representing it as your own. So you cannot plagiarize it. The whole idea around cheating, I always ask, how do you define cheating? What does it look like? And give me a contextual example. And by the way, if you associate using, for example, artificial intelligence with cheating, i.e., I'm using it to help me with something, then I also want to see a policy that tells students that they can no longer, that their families can't hire a tutor at home and you can't get help from an adult at home. Because the whole idea is going into what are the inequities that exist that in this context, artificial intelligence can mitigate or even eliminate or dismantle some of those inequities. And that's why the whole idea is to start rethinking some of these things. Also rethinking this whole idea around truth and fantasy. Let me ask you all a question real quick. One of these two images is AI generated. Take a guess in the chat if you think it's the one on the left or if you think it's the one on the right. Or even again, anybody else want to guess before I reveal the answer? Okay, now we have three lefts and two rights. Okay, wonderful. Now we have more. Okay, y'all ready? I'm gonna give you the answer now. The correct answer is the following. The image on the left is real. So I'm glad you all did that. The image on the right is AI generated. And I did this on purpose, and I'll share with you all. The image on the left, I know it's real because it's my photo, and it's one of my favorite castles in Germany called Burg Eltz. I literally went into one of the image generators, and I did several prompts over and over and over again to get it to be as close to realistic as possible. And then that's when I did this. So what you all are looking at, again, the image on the left is my image, and the image on the right is AI generated. So this is why we really need to understand that sometimes that truth and fantasy line can be blurred. Yes, bias exists in the data sets, the coding, and the algorithms. Humans our brains, where our brains work, we have biases. So it's a fact. It's a neurobiological fact. The problem is that ends up in the platforms. It is embedded in the data sets that are used, and it's embedded in the algorithms, and especially how the algorithms process information, prioritize information, and identify patterns. The dog. Okay. And so that's something for us to keep our eye on, and I'm going to share with you all how we address that later. I would also say that the whole idea of the fear-mongering around jobs being taken by artificial intelligence, I just remember how it was like robots are going to replace humans. But I also would follow up with, okay, so if a robot's going to replace a human, then, and that one particular job is gone, but how many jobs are created? Because someone's got to manufacture the materials for the robot, someone has to design the robot, someone has to build the robot, someone has to do the coding for the robot, someone has to perform maintenance on the robot, and someone has to do quality checks on the robot. So the whole idea around, oh, the job's going to be taken. Yeah, there may be some that are taken, but also we need to think in terms of how many are also created as a result of it. What are some of the harmful effects that may be automated within the patterns? Remember, it does pattern recognition. And then the last one for me, the big one to ask is, who are the gatekeepers to that information? In education, I do think it's worthwhile to ask. And I actually had a meeting with one of the AI platforms that are incorporating AI. I specifically said, where are you all getting the data sets from, and who's doing the coding for how the AI is going to work within those data sets? And I was told that they use the ChatGPT, so they use the OpenAI component of that. I'm like, okay, then how are you accounting for the bias that's in that? Like, we need to ask those questions. Where are you getting the data sets from, and who is doing the coding for those data sets? What are you doing to supervise that data? And you'll see that in a moment. That leads into the next thing, which these are things for us to keep in mind. Your generative AI, they use large, massive, incredibly massive volumes of data. And I will share with you all, think about it from the bias perspective. The data tends to come from Reddit, YouTube, Wikipedia, and several other social media platforms, and sometimes blogs as well. So think about how you can put anything on the internet. the good stuff and the potentially harmful stuff. All of that ends up in those data sets. But that leads to the following. So one, it works on pattern recognition, which is your machine learning. Okay. That's the platforms you all have played around with that you said. Okay. The other things you saw, like your customer service chats, are not generative AI. They use data, but it is what's called, and you'll see in a moment, it's what's called labeled and supervised data, i.e., you can't go into a customer service chat and say, I need you to develop a lesson plan for an 11th grade trigonometry class. It won't give you an answer because that's not in the data sets. Okay. The whole idea being that is supervised and labeled data because it's data, it's a platform for a specific narrow purpose. What we're doing is talking about large language models, but there is no narrow purpose. You have to tell it what the purpose is, and we'll get into that shortly. And so the whole idea being that the generative AI learns from our patterns and creates content that matches those patterns in important ways. And this goes back to the whole idea with the bias, is to recognize that there are some patterns that we don't want replicated and we don't want matched. When it comes to the data, here are your three different categorizations of data. Supervised is labeled right or wrong, a good or bad example, high quality or low quality. So if you use things like the voice assistant, that's supervised data right there, because it's only going to give you limited responses. Semi-supervised data are things like, which it provides guideposts, or things like using Yelp or Spotify or anything where the more you use it, it starts giving you recommendation because your usage creates a pattern. And then based on that pattern, it looks at what might be helpful for you. So it's somewhat labeled, but it also provides guideposts. The unsupervised data is our large language models and our image generators. And generally the way they work is that you see more of a thing, the assumption is it must be right. And then that means that it's rendering an opinion of the quality of data and the output based on the volume of usage or the volume of appearance, which is not always a good thing. So I want to take some time to take a look with you all and share a couple of things. We're going to do two distinct things right now. So first of all, before I go on, I know this is a lot. Is everybody good at the moment? Just, you can give me good, thumbs up, whatever you want in the chat. I want to make sure everybody's good. And I am going to make sure we have some time in case you all have some questions towards the end. Everybody good? Okay, perfect. That's two. Okay, good. Obviously, this is recorded. So, and I didn't want to inundate you all with too much information, but I needed to establish some of these things. So we're going to take a look at a couple of things. So these are the core elements when it comes to visual storytelling. So right now, I'm going to talk about visual storytelling. These are the core elements to visual storytelling, whether it be photography, digital storytelling, slides, any of those things. It's understanding composition and framing, color and lighting, perspective and point of view, if you have people in it, character expression and body language, and then also use of symbolism and metaphors. Those are the 5 core elements of visual storytelling. Those are the essentials, okay? And again, I know this is recorded. What I want to do is, real quick, is give you all something in just a moment. Let me see if this will work. Oh, yeah. These are, when I do my visual storytelling workshops, these are how I break down. Oh, it's not going to work. Darn it. I was going to give you all definitions of all these, but for time's sake, we're going to see it in action. Okay. So core elements of visual storytelling. Next, when it comes to using your image generators, here are your protocols and your parameters for prompt engineering. And the whole idea around prompt engineering is, what am I typing in to get it to do something? What is the prompt? What is the language I'm using? So when it comes to image generators, and especially for those of you that haven't played with them yet, you always want to incorporate the following. What is the context? What is the setting? What are some of the details? And what is any additional information? And then based upon that, how do I communicate that to the image generator in as clear, a concise, and unambiguous way as possible? Okay. So this is where it comes in. And this is how if you go into the bias, which you're going to see in a moment, how can we create the guardrails of the platform knowing that the bias in the data sets exist? It's in how we construct our prompts. Okay, so I'm going to show you all a couple of examples of what happens when you don't give all these details. So I went into DAL-E, which is one of the image generators, and I typed in flight attendant. That was my prompt. You see, that doesn't do those 4 things. It's very generalized. But I want you all to see what the result was. That was the result when I did flight attendant. You all notice anything about the bias in the data set? Clearly, whoever coded this determined that flight attendants tend to only be female for one. And then in this case, you only see Asian female representations. The next time I did it, I typed in lawyer. And let me go back, because remember, these don't follow this. That's why I want you all to see, we know the bias is there. Now, how do we mitigate or decrease the likelihood of its impact and its occurrence? This was flight attendant. This was lawyer. And that was in DAL-E. That was the image generated DAL-E. I'm going to show you all another couple of things in just a moment. Let me see. There it is. Yeah. So that was in DAL-E. And keep in mind that even OpenAI that has ChatGPT and DALL-E, all of these different platforms, they may work the same, but the data sets and the algorithms are different. I did the same search in ChatGPT because now you can do an image generator. I typed in lawyer, and this is what it gave me. And you'll see my prompt. It said, generate an image of a lawyer. So even the same company that has two platforms, you get completely different results. I also want you all to see this. Okay. I did a search in Google Images because remember, that's one of the areas they're getting the data from. If you'll notice, my search was professional hairstyle. If you notice, this is not a screenshot. I literally just did this a short time ago, about an hour ago. I did professional hairstyles. Look at the results. Then I did unprofessional hairstyle. Look at the results. And you might say, whoa, keep in mind, that's in a Google image search. That is data that is in the image generators. The DALL-E ones you saw were screenshots. Just for transparency, I went into DALL-E and did another search for lawyer. This is what it gave me this time. Then I did another search for flight attendant. This is what it gave me this time. So do you all see part of the whole strategy around knowing that the bias exists, that you all now have seen with your own two eyes? And again, these are not screenshots, okay? So if we know that going in, going back to scenario 2 of that map, if we know that going in, what are the strategies that we can incorporate to mitigate the appearance and the impact of that? So I want to play a game with you all real quick. We're going to do something. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you an image that I used Adobe Firefly to generate. And I want you all to analyze that image. And I want you to look at what do you think was the syntax, i.e. the words that I used to generate that image, keeping in mind the following: context, setting, details, and additional information. Okay, that's the image right there. So we're going to do an activity around reverse engineer the prompts that I use to generate this image, and just type them in the chat. And I'm being mindful of our time, how we're going to run out. Oops. We'll say, Diane, you're on to it. Keep in mind, those of you that are putting, and this is a good activity, by the way, for us to do. It's a great activity to do with kids. Let me go back to it. I'll go back to the image. Remember, context, setting, details, and additional information. Alex did a pretty good job as well. Diane, look at what Diane shared, and even look at what Jennifer shared of how it's context, setting, details, and additional information. So I'll show you all what I did on this one. Hang on. Here it is. In Adobe Firefly, if you'll notice, this was my prompt here, and I'll copy and paste this into the chat. This was a prompt that I used. And you see it gave me different versions, but ultimately I want you all to see the slide. That was a prompt that I used. Now juxtapose what I put there with context, setting, details, and additional information. The context, it's beach and time, a sunset. Setting, it's a beach and it's sunset. It's a beach. The setting, it's at sunset. The details, I need a chair with not just an umbrella, with an open umbrella, and the waves are crashing. Hopefully you all can see where doing even what we just did, it encourages students to start to develop that the visual storytelling core characteristic you all saw. They can start to synthesize and process that whole concept of composition, framing, setting, color, light, all those things, even in the context of just simply the prompt that they use for image generation. And I would share with you all, because we don't have the time for me to do it, but all I have to do is change. In fact, I'm going to do it real quick anyway. Watch this. So can you all see the prompt down here at the bottom? Yes? Down here where my cursor is? Hopefully you can. Can you all see it? Okay, good. Okay, so if you notice, a beach chair with an open umbrella on a beach with waves crashing at sunset. Watch what happens when I just do this. I'm going to remove sunset and watch what happens. Now I'm leaving it open to interpret it on its own because I didn't give it, remember, those guidelines, those signposts. You see how it's completely different. And all I did was remove at sunset. That's why those things are critical. Going back to the bias, If we can't control the data sets, what we can control is the construction of our prompts to eliminate/mitigate those things. And all you all saw me do was just remove at sunset. Just that one critical detail to the finished product changed it completely. Now, I'm going to share with you all a couple more things with this, and then I will move on. I will say, of all the image generators, the one that I tend to find to be the most reliable and within safety, and I use it in air quotes, tends to be Adobe Firefly. But let me tell you all why. Adobe Firefly, I have friends that work at Adobe, but it's not that. When they told me it was coming out, I said, oh, great. What data sets are they using? Adobe Firefly only uses Adobe stock photos. So if you go into Adobe stock and they have a library of stock images, a whole lot of images, that's what they're using. So remember back with that gate and the lock, that's why I asked that question. Oh, what data sets do they use? Oh, they're using Adobe stock. That tells me it's going to be a bit more reliable, because you can't just put anything in Adobe stock. So there's some degree of a vetting process of an image before it ends up in Adobe stock. Yes, you might be a little bit more limited in the data that they can use, but my whole thing with that is like, yeah, but I also know that by doing that, it is a safer platform because it's not just anything. And those are things to consider. Another thing to consider is the following: the use of language. So I even did this, and this is where we're going to get into language usage in a moment. I even did this. When I'm generating an image, I need to think about all the things: setting, context, details, additional information. What are some of the synonyms? That's a key word. You're going to see that come up in a moment. What are some of the synonyms I could use that could help me refine my prompt? Think about that when it comes to our learners around understanding not just the depth and the usage of language, but the strategic contextual use of language. If I don't have the idea or the list, that's what now I'm going to use ChatGPT for. I said, give me a list of 10 synonyms for creativity that I can use in a prompt for an image generator. And he gave me these 10. So think about the power of using any one of these in a prompt. I need 2 people sitting in a beach chair at a beach with open umbrellas, looking at each other and with an expressive look on their face. You see, I gave all of those details in that context and that setting. What's the likelihood that the results I'm going to get is going to be either exactly what I want or pretty darn close to what I want? You have to do that whole thing. And that's why I share with y'all early on. The oversimplification of it is not, it's disingenuous, and it's a disservice to us in education. There are ways for us to leverage this within the context of everything we do that is aligned with digital literacy and digital fluency and technology acumen. So these are some questions to think about with what I just shared. And the reason why I have these questions here is think about the barriers that exist for students when it comes to finding the right image. Do they have access to cameras? Do they know how to use Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator? Do they understand, or do they have an artistic ability? What are those barriers to all those things that when you use an image generator, remove those? They allow students to be more creative in the context of visuals, but we still have to approach it from strategic and acutely aware a technology acumen perspective. You don't just go in and type in a search. You all saw examples of just general searches. But when you start to refine the syntax that you use, you increase the likelihood of getting the result that you want so that that doesn't become a barrier. And now we can focus on use of visuals in the context of storytelling and things like that. I'm going to share with you all a couple of more things because I'm mindful of the time. I knew I would be pressed for time. So that's for images. When it comes to our large language models, these are the things that I always share. Crafting effective prompts or questions for large language models to generate desired outputs. That's how I define prompt engineering. This language skill set is also critical, as you saw with the image generators. We have to have purpose, parameters, perspective, and then ultimately practice our prompts. Okay. Again, same thing, clear, concise, and unambiguous. You all saw an example of that. So I would encourage you all to do all of the following things. Number one, how do I know if a large language model is reliable? First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to ask it a question that I know something a lot about. That's the first thing I'm going to do. And depending upon the response, it will tell me either my prompt needs to be refined or the data sets are not necessarily reliable for the information that I would need. That's why I tell people I would use different ones because, again, they work differently. I would do it around lesson design. Look at some of the lessons that maybe you've designed and say, hey, I've got a lesson. This is what I'm looking to do. Evaluate this lesson and give me this feedback. You're going to see what that looks like in a moment. Feedback, scoring, email writing, even more. I'll share a few. So let me share with you all real quick how they work. And Concethia, I'm going to try to wrap this up in just a few minutes because I do want to allow at least time for a couple of questions. So I apologize. So number one, your large language models work like this. I designed this graphic. They work based on word vectors. You take a word, and it serves as a node. And how is it associated with other words? And then the ancillary connections. That's how it looks at the patterns of the words. And that's where the whole idea, the whole idea around our use of language becomes very strategic. Should I use location or do I need to be specific? A city, and where specifically is that city? Los Angeles. You saw that with the image generator. It's also where synonyms are your friend and your power. That's part of your power up thing. If you don't know the synonyms, guess what? Type it in. I need a list of synonyms for the following. But if you'll notice, these are examples that I always share when it comes to designing effective prompts. You ask it, give me 10 synonyms for the word blank. That's what you just saw with creativity. But I also gave it context for creativity, but for use in generating a prompt for an image generator. Okay. Give me 10 ways of phrasing something. Think about that for students. I don't understand it. Hey, use it. 10 ways of phrasing this for, and then give your grade level. And what is the class? Is it English? Is it, 7th grade English class? And look at how it will create the results. Instead of giving me, a list, change it. Give me an unabridged list. Give me the whole list. Give me all items in the list. Hopefully you all see, like even this, labeling, sending an email, a student or a parent. They can be a recipient or receive the email, but you can't say both. You wouldn't say, I need to send an email to a student for them to receive the following. That becomes ambiguous. I want you all to see a couple of more, even though I'm going through these. So let me go back. So remember synonyms, now causative language, cause and effect. One thing can cause another thing to happen. The one at the top is too ambiguous and not refined. If you put in your lesson plan, below is a lesson plan I wrote with some initial feedback. It is for my 10th grade class. Rewrite the lesson plan. That should be refined in causative language. Below is a lesson plan I wrote for my 10th grade English class. Use the following feedback to rewrite the lesson plan or apply the feedback to the plan. Cause and effect. The next couple I'll kind of zip through, unfortunately, is even transformative language, which hopefully you all saw I use this with some of those prompts. So, for example, writing a prompt like you would a search. This is not Google search. We are generating something, not looking for something. So it's write a prompt in the same way you would talk to another human. And that's where you get into the whole idea around natural language processing. Another idea, instead of this, do this. So instead of rewrite this to be shorter, condense this. Because here, and let me give you an example of that. If I say rewrite this to be shorter, that's ambiguous. And what will happen is it will start adding language that isn't my language. If I say condense this, it's saying use what you have that I provided and then now make it, condense it. But use what I provided. Don't add anything else to it. So again, the whole idea is to recognize that. Write an interesting hook rather than hook the reader with an interesting fact. I used to say that to students. Even things like this. Which of these story prompts would you prefer to work with? The first one, if I were to say, write a story about me. Or the second one, write a story about the challenges I faced as an athlete overcoming a fear I have of losing. Which one of those two gives you better context for you to be able to write? So anyway, I know I'm pretty much at time now. I'll share some of this because I wanted us to do this right here was to really start to look at the whole idea around our use of language. I always hear things like, well, students will just start writing stories. And this is an example of one of the things I challenge educators to do around, if you've got to write a story about a hero's journey, can you just go straight into AI and say, write me a story about a hero's journey? Or are you going to produce a better result when you have context and compositional understanding? What is a hero? What is a protagonist? What is an antagonist? What is a journey? What are the 12 steps of that journey? How do I recognize what each and every step is? Like the whole idea around you don't just go in and write it because you're not going to get quality results. And it does require, a foundational understanding. So I'll just share with you all a few final things around this. Is just to remember, practice your prompts, practice. Always ask it information, ask it a question about something you know a lot about. Also, we don't have the time, but I'm a big believer. I actually do workshops in media literacy, and it's recognizing the quality of the information. Misinformation is information spread without the intent to deceive. And then, of course, there's disinformation, where it's information with a deliberate intent to mislead or manipulate. And then malinformation is something that has been slightly altered to cause harm. When we go in with the lens of literacy, fluency, technology acumen, and language skills and media literacy, hopefully you all see where using these platforms can be used for good, but we need to know, again, scenario 2. I want you all to see the whole map, and then you yourself can determine what is the best route to take. So in summation, I'll share with you all a few final things to keep in mind. Is that what is it good at? Synthesizing information, idea generation, and fast responses. What is it not good at? Contextual or cultural understanding, nuance of voice, and emotional intelligence. And so I say that what we really got to do is really start to bridge the gap between the promise of using AI and the reality of the platforms, which I've shared with you all, because I do think that when we do scenario 1, I won't say it's being disinformation, but it's malinformation. Excuse me. I won't say it's disinformation, but it definitely engages in misinformation. And the analogy I always share is, whatchamacallit, if you're not telling the whole picture, then it's like giving candy to people that already have cavities because it tastes good and we like it, but the way it's being given to us is not necessarily good or for our benefit. So I think in going forward for you all, just to consider all the following things. How do we address the things about AI and its impact on education we are unsure of? What are the things we are opposed and should be? What are the things we are opposed to and should be and should not be? What questions should we have to those that are in favor of AI but not given the full picture? I do think you all should ask those questions. Remember the big one. What is the data set that's being used? And then also, how might we leverage this technology to dismantle the patterns and the predictability of learning experiences and outcomes? And I'll share with you all that I always say, if it's predictable, then it's also preventable. And hopefully you all saw that with some of the strategies and techniques that I shared there. Concethia, I know it's 5:31. Maybe I didn't see any question. Does anyone have a question in closing? And like I said, I know it's a lot. Maybe you all should give yourself time and space to process. It's recorded. But I wanted to at least equip you all with the full buffet so that you could pick what you want from it and proceed forward. And especially if you're on break and you're looking at playing around with some of the platforms.
Absolutely. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or we can unmute you as well. And this session has been absolutely magical. Man,
thank you. My guess is many of you are not going to have questions because you need time to process, and that's okay.
Thank you, Julian. This is one of the best sessions. Full buffet. It surely was. Yes, Gina, we will be sharing the presentation.
Yeah, so it's recorded. Somehow, some way, I got to get you. I would love for everybody to have some of those core questions that I posed because I know I kind of went through them. And then Diane, I'm leading a workshop on using AI as a teaching assistant. What would be the most important thing to say? So Diane, to answer your question, I think the most important thing is around the prompts that I shared. Hang on one second. If you're using it as a teaching assistant, then you always want to be mindful of these things here. I won't be able to share the whole slide deck for several reasons, and mainly because it's a very, very large. The slide deck is like 5 gig file. But Diane, to your point, what would be some of the most important things to say? Okay, so if you're using it as a teaching assistant, what is the purpose in using it as the assistant? What are the parameters you want it to operate as an assistant? What is the perspective you want it to have as an assistant? And then what is the goal of the outcome of using it as an assistant? If you do those things, that's the most important things I would say. Because remember, clear, concise, and unambiguous prompts will yield better results, better context, better output. For example, I'll use this as an example for you all. I taught in a technology lab. So if I were to use it as a teaching assistant, I would say, okay, first of all, I teach in a technology lab at the middle school level. The primary components of my instructional program are around design, graphic design, visual storytelling, film and video production. Okay, so I've now given it all this context. Now, what do I want it to do as an assistant? I could say, I've designed this lesson and I want you to give feedback on the lesson. Here's an example. Give me feedback on this lesson to make sure it is accessible to diverse learners, to learners who don't speak English as their primary language, and incorporates the right technology resources so that they can create their visual stories. That would be an example of using purpose, parameters, perspective. And of course, if I don't get the right result at first, then I'm just going to, as you all saw with the visual, sometimes it's just changing a few words. I may change diverse learners and say, give me 10 synonyms for, special education. I refer to as diverse learners, but anyway, I can say, give me 10 synonyms for that. Or I can say language acquisition. Give me 10 synonyms for language acquisition in the context of designing a lesson for a 5th grade class. So anyway, but that's how I would always start off, like that. What is the purpose? What are the parameters? From whose perspective? Now, how do I compose that using the right syntax, the semantics, the synonyms, to clear, concise, unambiguous? What is your ask? And why are you asking it? And like I said, with the image generator, you all just saw that. Change one thing, get a completely different result.
Completely different result.
Completely different. Any final questions? Because I know we're over time now. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine. No apologies needed at all. This has been a very well spent. Agreed, Jennifer. It's been a well spent hour. I know I've learned so much myself, so I'm sure everyone that will be taking a look at this recording will benefit. Any additional questions?
All right. I think that's that is it. I do. Let me see if I could post these in the chat.
Okay.
I don't know if it will do them all. Oops, hang on. Pause 1 second here.
Sure.
See if it works. Yep, there we go. There's the thinking prompts going forward.
Oh, this is perfect.
Diane, thank you. Now I know there's only six of us left. It's too bad we didn't have enough time, because then I would go back to that scenario question. Do you want scenario 1 or do you want scenario 2? Now you see why I posed that.
Yep. Oh man, this literally it was one of the best. Better context equals better output. Ken, thank you so much for your time, your insight, giving us the knowledge on making sure we're refining our prompts to get the best results. Thank you everyone for joining us. Ken, definitely one of the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank y'all for being here.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. Thank you for your time. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you all next time.